In this video, we're going to talk about what a specification is and how to use it. Obvious question, what's a specification? Well, it's basically the official rules and conventions for computer language. Every computer language has a specification. When you run into trouble, this is where you should look to see how a tag works, in our case using markup language, or how a function operates if you're talking about a programming language. It's sort of a user's guide. It lists all of the possible tags and their properties, again, when we're talking about markup languages. And it will, some of them will include examples of usage, and the ones we're going to look at today definitely do include some helpful examples for us. And then it will also have some other technical information. There's definitely going to be some information in there that's meant more for developers that you're not necessarily going to understand or need, and that's fine. What we're really interested in is understanding all of the different possibilities for that language, and the specification helps. It also, like I said, it's the most current version, so sometimes, especially if it's a while since we've checked specification, things might have changed, so it's useful to know when something maybe suddenly stops working. There might have been an update to the specification and something that we've been doing no longer works anymore. So for example, there have been tags in HTML that definitely have become obsolete since I've started coding HTML. And so I have to continually learn the new tags and the new conventions to get the effect that I'm looking for. Where do we find specifications and how do we use them? So let's start with the HTML5 specification. Here's the HTML standard, right? And we see here it's last updated in July 2020. That's good. It's also called the living standard. That means that it is continually changing. Obviously it's written in HTML and it's meant to be functional for users. What we're really interested in is the elements of HTML. And it walks us through all of the different parts of the HTML page, from the document element HTML, where we see there's a little example, right? So this is the tag that it's telling us about, and it's giving us an example down here. It's also giving us some basic technical information about it, telling you when it's used, right? And giving you some information about how to use it. So notice here, authors are encouraged to specify a lang attribute in the root HTML giving the document's language. This is a relatively new thing, coding-wise. So, and why would we want to do this? Well, it aids in speech synthesis tools to determine pronunciations to use and translation to determine what rules to use, right? So it's actually really important to, nowadays to announce the language for your HTML page. For the content on your HTML page. So that gives us this information. And like I said, this is a pretty relatively new thing, so we might not have known that otherwise. Now notice we can get into all sorts of other elements on the page. We've been looking at the paragraph element. So here we have it. This is the paragraph, pretty simple. And notice it gives us some examples. It gives us all of the technical information about a particular tag. So if there is a tag, a current tag that's in use, it's going to be listed and included in this specification. And using the specification can help us to know how to use it. It also gets into things like types and properties, as well as the basic tags themselves. Okay, so what about the CSS3 specification? Here is the CSS specification, and it looks a little bit different. It works a little bit different. In this case, the terms index is a really good, or the indices, I should say, in general, is really the best place to go to get at the detailed information about specific properties. So, for example, here, the selector index, we talked a little bit about the hover property for links. So notice you can use this to apply CSS attributes to the hovered version of a web link. So that can be really useful. This is how you would do it. You would render it with the A, which is the anchor tag. We'll talk about that later on. A colon and then the word hover. And then any code that you put after that would be applied to just the hover state of that, of all the links on the page. So that's kind of cool. And then there's all sorts of different properties and values. So let's take a look at one that's pretty interesting and that I'm sure you'll find useful eventually. Background image. So you can use CSS to apply background images to a text. Again, gives you a bunch of different, some information about it, gives you some examples. You have some properties like background repeat, and there, I mean, just lots of different properties. And look how it tells you information about all the different properties. You also can have layered background images, right? Notice here there are actually 2 images mentioned. So that's really interesting. You might not have known that until you came here and looked at the specification. And then notice here, there's even a little article about how to layer multiple images and position them on the screen. So just looking through the specification can help you learn things that maybe you didn't even know existed. I've definitely learned a lot of things by simply coming to the specification, looking up different tags, and then seeing what properties and elements and taking a look at the examples. That gives you a sense of where to find the specifications. I have links for you to find them, but even if you just Google, you know, HTML specification, CSS specification, you'd find them. But then also how to use them. The indexes and the specific lists of tags are really where you want to go, and then take a look at the properties and the information about it. There's one other thing that I did want to just note, and that is that the specifications, they're really meant for developers. So they're not terribly user-friendly in you know, the language that they use necessarily. They're very factual and technical and precise, which is great. And like I said, you can learn a lot from them. However, you may find that in terms of helping yourself learn how to use a new, you know, something that you've learned about on the standard, a tutorial might be a better way to go to do that. And the W3 schools, same people who put out those standards, also create more user-friendly versions that are tutorials. And I've got links to these tutorial sites there as well. You can see there's HTML and CSS landing pages here, and that there are lots of, you know, the elements, attributes, all those things. And you can see examples here and use the try it yourself interfaces to do that. So the tutorials can be a lot easier, no doubt, in terms of learning how to use a new thing. But don't discount the specifications because they are comprehensive in a way that these tutorials are not. And like I said, you can learn a lot of new things there.